So at the time of recording, we are now in the third week of the COVID-19 lockdown in the UK. And I'm going to talk about my longest ever cycle ride. Don't worry, I'm sticking religiously to the social distancing guidelines. This ride actually happened quite some time ago now. My name is John Hayes, and you're listening to episode number 2 of the Follow the Blue Line podcast. A podcast about cycling, friendship, cake, beer, and anything else that matters. A cafe bar in Fabrica, which according to Lonely Planet is home to one of the world's most beautiful beaches and, in my opinion, is still one of Portugal's best kept secrets, is a funny place to start a story about cycling between the more, shall I say, bracing Lincolnshire seaside resort towns of Cleethorpes, Mablethorpe and Skegness. But it was in Fabrica, in the long hot summer of 2018, that I was inspired to write about cycling in a much cooler place. Now, clearly I'm talking about temperatures here. It was the hottest August on record, as temperatures soared to 46 degrees centigrade, that's about 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The surrounding countryside burst into flames. Wildfires burned around the city of Faro and all the way along the coast to Silves and Portimão. Thousands of tourists and locals were evacuated as more than 23,000 hectares of land were scorched before the flames were quelled. I wasn't about to let a national emergency ruin a hard-earned family holiday, and so our days at the beach, by the pool and at the water park were spent under the occasional passing plume of smoke. In fact, other than nervously checking the horizon for flames every time the wind changed direction, our 2018 vacation in Portugal was very much like any other, except for just one thing: it was too hot to cycle. This was a pity because there's nowhere on earth I'd rather ride my bike than Portugal. My book, Follow the Blue Line, Cycling the Algarve, had just been published, and I hope to use the holiday to get back out on my bike and do some social media posts and perhaps film some YouTube videos to promote it. Normally, I don't mind cycling in the heat. When people ask me about the challenges of cycling in the summer, I tell them that if you ride fast enough, you create your own breeze. It's like having your own air conditioning unit on your bike. However, this only works until the mercury climbs above 40 degrees centigrade. Then, even for a heat-loving lizard like me, the theory begins to melt. I'd hired a bike for the day from a beachfront concession in Cleethorpes de Tavera. The fact that the bike only cost €5 for the day should have, at the very least, sounded some warning bells. I really should have declined the bone shaker when the hire company couldn't even give me a pump to put some air in the back tyre and suggested I ask a rival hire company if they could help me out. Even with a little extra air in the tyre, the ride felt like hard work. My initial plan for the day was to cycle out to Villarreal de San Antonio on the Spanish border and back, a round trip of some 35 kilometres, and a ride I'd done many times before. The heat and my bad bike had other ideas. I barely made it the 5 kilometres along the coast to Fabrica before I had to stop for a medicinal beer. I sat on a small sea wall overlooking the channel between the village and the beautiful island beach and sipped my beer while reconsidering my options. The heat had just sapped my energy, and the thought of getting back on an awful bike just didn't appeal to me. So there I was, sitting in paradise with a cold beer in my hand, and I was thoroughly depressed. How the hell could this have happened to me? Just a few months earlier, I'd cycled the entire length of the Algarve without even breaking a sweat. Today, the sweat was pouring off me quicker than I could replace it with alcohol, and that's never a good idea in the heat. Maybe I was getting too old for this sort of thing. What was a 47-year-old doing wasting his precious holiday time in the sun riding bikes for anyway? Surely I should have been back with the family at the apartment, embarrassing my kids in inappropriate swimwear like the other dads around the pool. I cut my losses and slowly headed back to Cleethorpes, where I spent the rest of the day on a sun lounger, sipping water and fretting about my lack of cycling stamina. Little did I know at the time, in the course of the 10-kilometre ride there and back, I'd somehow managed to get heat stroke. I won't go into too much detail other than describing the next 48 hours, which included a flight home, as largely revolving around being sick from both ends, while my youngest daughter Dottie ran around singing a self-composed song about Diarrhea Dave and Sicky Steve coming to tea. While Dave and Steve disappeared within a couple of days of returning to the UK, the feeling of failure stuck around for many weeks. I would almost certainly have to do something about this. I needed a new challenge. The challenge needed to be something big, something I could be proud of, something that would restore my masculinity. I would never profess to be an athlete, but distance is not usually a problem for me. Give me the best part of a day and I'll happily put in a slow 50, 60, 70 or even 80 miles. But there was one distance that had always evaded me: 100 miles. If I was ever to regain my confidence in my ability as a cyclist, I knew I'd have to push myself past the ton. Pick up any glossy cycling magazine and you'll find pages and pages of advice about reaching specific distances. There'll be advice on training schedules, helping you work up to the big event, advice on nutrition and fueling your ride, and technical advice about preparing your bike. My eyes would typically gloss over within a couple of sentences. None of the cyclists on their £5,000 plus bikes featured in these magazines looked like me. I decided I didn't need these guys' advice and set about planning my own route. My usual Saturday morning ride takes me from my home in Cleethorpes to Mablethorpe, taking in the villages of Halton-le-Clay, Tetney, North Coates, North Somercotes and Saltfleet. This would normally cover around 56 miles, and with the aid of a battered jumbo sausage and chips, a can of Iron Brew and maybe a cheeky pint of shandy along the way, wouldn't normally present any problems. Now, on the continent, a shandy is often referred to as a radler. In German, radler means cyclist, therefore it stands to reason that a shandy is the perfect drink for us cyclists. Based on absolutely no scientific evidence, I will tell you that shandy is full of essential performance-enhancing ingredients, such as sugar and carbs, while lacking the alcoholic clout to make you fall off your bike. It'll also quench your thirst faster than any isotonic energy drink, and it'll taste a hell of a lot better. Occasionally I would extend this ride out to Mablethorpe by pushing on to the genteel beach resort of Sutton-on-Sea, or the more boisterous fleshpots of Skegness, often referred to as Skeg Vegas by the hordes of day trippers and caravan-based holidaymakers who would flood to the east coast every year. This would take my ride anywhere up to 86 miles and would require a packet of jelly babies and a Snickers bar to supplement my fueling strategy. I knew I could make up the extra 14 miles needed to hit the ton by taking some detours around the various villages between Cleethorpes and Skegness, and set about on Google Maps looking for the longest possible route there and back. Worst case scenario, if my ride fell short of the 100-mile target, I'd cycle around the block until Strava confirmed I'd reached my objective. 14 extra miles doesn't seem like too much, but my rides out to Skegness hadn't always been successful. In fact, you just need to ask my kids about my attempts to cover the distance and they'll happily highlight my many failures. In my eldest daughter Rose's mind, the ride that best illustrates my cycling career is one that fell short of Skegness by a couple of miles. My partner Sarah, an avid park runner, don't even get started on her latest PB, had entered a 10k running race in Skegness, and so we thought we'd make a long weekend of it and book a hotel. Sarah and the kids would drive out there while I would jump on my bike early in the day, hoping to meet them in time for the 2 p.m. check-in. I made it all the way along to Ingelmelds, home of the famous Butlands holiday resort, when my back tyre suddenly deflated. The whole coast was clouded in thick fog for the duration of my ride. Not only did this make me incredibly nervous about oncoming traffic, it also completely soaked me through to the skin. To be honest, it just wasn't my tyre that was deflated. Luckily, I'd come prepared with tyre levers, a spare tube and a pump in my panniers. Pushing my bike off the road, I was just about to set about changing my tube when my smartphone rings. It was Sarah. She wanted to know where I was and if I wanted a lift to the hotel. Normally I would have declined such an offer, but listen, I was cold and wet, and it was only 3 miles to the hotel. Shortly after 40 plus miles, I could be proud of myself. Not according to Rose. This was the one failure that outweighed every successful ride I'd ever completed. The coast-to-coast ride across the UK, the numerous rides across the Algarve in Portugal, the ride around Lake Balaton in Hungary, are not worth mentioning when compared to the time I begged Mum to pick me up and failed to cycle to Skegness. This is a shame because if she really wanted to highlight a catastrophic failure on a ride, she'd get much more mileage out of my next ride between Cleethorpes and Skegness. This was the ride I was really going to crush 100 miles on. My levels of preparation were unsurpassed. I'd restricted my intake of red wine the night before, I'd made some sandwiches and packed them up with some energy-boosting chocolate brownies and a flask of black coffee in my panniers. I even took particular care to check the weather forecast before setting off. It looked like my ride was going to be overcast but dry. There was some heavy rain and even some thunder and lightning forecast for just south of Skegness, but I wasn't going south of Skegness, so that wouldn't be a problem. The ride down to Skegness was pretty uneventful, not too hot, not too cold, and a breeze so light it was hard to discern which direction it was blowing in. The numerous wind farms dotted along the Lincolnshire coast idled in stillness. On windy days, these wind turbines taunt me mercilessly by pointing in the wrong direction, like huge weather vanes letting me know the wind will never be on my back. As I cycled into Skegness and hit the beachfront, I became aware that the sky to the south of the resort was darkening. However, the stillness of the day lulled me into a false sense of security. The bad weather was some miles away. I assumed, with no wind behind it, I could easily outrun any storm should the weather move in my direction. I found a bench, leaned my bike against the seawall, and unpacked my picnic lunch and flask of coffee for my panniers. I barely touched my sandwich before the first massive drop of rain hit my cheek. At first, I thought I'd been targeted by a passing seagull, but then I felt another and another. I couldn't be sure, but it seemed to be getting much darker. Then I heard the first rumble of thunder in the distance. Perhaps the storm was a lot closer than it had been forecast. I stuffed the rest of the sandwich in my mouth, washed it down with a mouthful of coffee, and jumped back on my bike. It was time to get the hell out of Vegas. Those first few miles heading out of Skegness felt good. I was working really hard and picking up pace. I felt strong and fit, but this burst of speed had nothing to do with my athleticism. The wind had picked up and those wind turbines were certainly spinning now. The wind was my back. Normally this would be a good thing, but this meant the storm was also moving. This wasn't a race I was going to win. It was just a case of how far I could get before I needed to find shelter. The lightning streaked across the sky to my left. It looked like it was a few miles away, but then it suddenly cracked like a shotgun right above my head. The rain was now tipping down in torrents, while lightning strobed the sky above me. The rain was falling so fast the road had begun to resemble a fast-flowing river. I had no idea how safe I was on a metal bike with so much electricity in the sky and only 23 millimetres between me and an incredibly waterlogged earth. And I'll be honest, I was beginning to panic. I'd never been more relieved in my life to see a petrol station complete with a little convenience store attached come into view. I pulled into the petrol station and bought a coffee from the machine in the shop and asked the assistant if she'd mind if I hung out in the shop until the storm had passed. I think she was glad of the company. 3 hours and several cups of coffee later, she told me the petrol station was closing and I'd have to leave. The rain and the thunder and lightning didn't look like they were going to stop any time soon, and the light was failing. Reluctantly, I phoned Sarah. She was busy and would be for the next 2 hours, so it would probably be another 3 hours before she could come and get me. I sheltered under the petrol station canopy for the next couple of hours, nervously watching the lightning flashing across the sky. Then all of a sudden, there was a massive crack in the sky directly above me. Then another and another. This was far too close for comfort. I decided to take action and walked across the road to a small row of houses. I knocked on the first door. No one was in. I tried the next door. A young girl wearing a onesie answered the door. I asked to speak to her parents. A rather nervous-looking woman appeared behind her, also dressed in a onesie. Can I help you? I've gone on a bike ride by mistake. My partner can't come and get me for another hour. I'm cold, wet, and a little scared. Any chance I can come in for a while? She turned her head and screamed, "Bobby, put the kettle on. There's an idiot outside who's got himself soaked to the skin." I was quickly pulled into the living room where I was introduced to a husband and son, both also wearing the obligatory onesies. They furnished me with coffee and cake and asked me all manner of questions. What the hell did I think I was doing? Didn't you check the weather forecast? 100 miles? Are you an idiot? That sort of thing. Actually, all of this mockery seemed to come from a good place, and I think they were genuinely happy for me to intrude in the household. I was certainly very happy to meet them. The hour flew by and Sarah called me from the petrol station, confused to see my bike chained to the fence, but no sight of me. I thanked my hosts and ran back across the road to meet my rather bemused girlfriend, where the questioning started again. What the hell did I think I was doing? Didn't you check the weather forecast? 100 miles? Are you an idiot? That sort of thing. The drive home was difficult. Water was flowing down the roads, and the flashes of lightning seemed far too close for comfort. Sarah clearly wasn't very happy with me, and we sat in silence for the majority of the ride home. It's funny, when I finally did tackle 100 miles, it seemed incredibly easy. First things first, I checked the weather forecast the night before and set off really early in the morning. I made sure I packed some energy bars and some gels to fuel the ride. I stopped in Mablethorpe, about 26 miles into the ride, for a coffee and a Snickers. I pushed into Skegness and treated myself to a giant fish supper and a pint of shandy at a fish and chip restaurant, and then slowly made my way back. I stopped again for a chocolate bar and a bottle of Lucozade in Saltfleet. Looking at the distance I'd covered upon reaching Skegness, I knew I'd have to add a few extra miles to the ride, and so rather than cycling around the block around my house multiple times, I took a detour to Northcote's airfield, where I had a little lie down in the field and enjoyed another energy bar before pushing onto the Crown and Anchor at Tetney Lock for a pint of lager, not shandy this time. While I enjoyed my pint, I phoned Sarah, and she asked me again if she'd like me to come and pick me up. With only 8 miles to go, the answer was a resounding no. It was the longest 8 miles I've ever ridden in my life. As I pulled into my drive, I checked my phone app to see I'd covered just over 100 miles, literally seconds before the device's battery went dead. In a blind panic, I stuck it on to charge and was able to recover and save the ride. I'd have to do it again if I didn't save it, because without any social proof these days, can you really say it happened? So there you go, 100 miles. No PBs, tons of calories burned and consumed, and a really great feeling to go with the ache in my backside and thighs. I've never done 100 miles again. I think the maximum I've ever done since is 85 on a ride from Zeebrugge to Brussels, but that's a different story. No matter. After my disaster in Portugal, I proved to myself that I was still capable of doing something that I know very few people have ever done. It wasn't the fastest 100 miles. It probably wasn't one of the slowest, but it's my 100 miles, and you can't take that away from me. I think that's the reason why I ride long distances, just to prove to myself I can do something I consider extraordinary. So what are you going to do to challenge yourself? Let me know by connecting with me on Facebook at facebook.com/followthebluelinebook. In the meantime, my name's John Hayes. You've been listening to the Follow the Blue Line podcast. Don't forget to check out the book at the same title on Amazon, and I'll catch up with you again very soon.